Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, the founder of Heuchera Limited, and we manufacture interesting fertilizers, novel biostimulants, and organic biopesticides. Today, I have a question that came in from my GP, my doctor, and she said, "Why is my rhododendron flowering this autumn?" So rhododendrons normally flower in the spring and produce very vivid displays, ornamental displays, but sometimes they flower in the autumn. And I have grown thousands and thousands of rhododendron plants as part of my PhD studies back from 2000 to 2004, so I am well placed to answer this question. It's not just rhododendrons that do this. A number of crops and plants, ornamental plants, do this. I was walking around Charleycote Manor today, which is a National Trust manor house here in Warwickshire near Stratford-upon-Avon, where William Shakespeare was born, and I saw some snowdrops appear, and that is precocious flowering. They should not be around at this time of year, and that's because normally they have the environmental signals they've picked up have sort of tricked them into flowering at the wrong time. So normally it's a warm autumn causes this. And you think, great, I've got double flowering. I've got flowering in the autumn and flowering in the spring. This is great. Two displays. However, this is not the same as a second set of flowering, what we term a secondary bloom. It's precocious flowering. This means that these flowers you'll not get flowers on those stems in the spring. And so you've actually dampened and weakened your massive floral display by having precocious flowering. And also, if it's a fruiting crop, then you won't get fruit on them. They will die and wither with the winter conditions and the frosts. So, not to be confused, it's something you normally do not want, is precocious flowering. And what else can we say about it? So it's grown, but it's caused by a stress of some sort. Now, what's this got to do with hydroponics? Well, it could potentially be an issue in hydroponics. If you think about strawberries, normally in strawberries, they grow day-neutral strawberries if you're trying to get them to be grown from seed to harvest in the hydroponic setup. So if you're continually growing in hydroponics, then you would just use day-neutral ones that don't respond to photoperiod, but also they don't respond to a winter chill. They will just flower and fruit regardless. However, these are considered not as good as the June-bearing short day varieties, and these are the ones that are grown for Wimbledon, which is in June, and they're grown in hydroponically in cocoa in gullies with hydroponic feeds. So it is a topic for hydroponics. And if these flower in the autumn, then that is obviously a loss of strawberry crop. So that's a big issue. So if you're growing June bearer strawberries, then outdoors, even if it's hydroponics, then that could be an issue. If you're growing them indoors, then obviously you're probably not going to be growing June bearers, but you might be growing them hydroponically indoors for propagation purposes. So you might be getting them from seed or from plantlet, cut off the main mother plant, growing them indoors, getting them bulked up, and then they may flower too early, so they might initiate the flowers. And that's an issue. And you can run into issues when you're growing perennial plants in vertical farms or in grow rooms indoors with artificial conditions and artificial lights, and there are a whole host of different problems you can get. So if you try to grow, I've got a Venus flytrap, and after Halloween, which was yesterday, I have to take it out of my grow room and let it die off and let it die down, because it just won't survive if you keep it growing too long, and because it needs that winter dormancy. So don't think just because you can grow, you think, oh, I'll give it the perfect conditions and it won't go dormant. Sometimes the plants need it for proper development. If you try to grow an apple tree indoors without any cold treatment, it won't produce any apples. It'll just keep on growing vegetatively because it needs that cold to initiate flowering and for bud burst. It just won't burst its buds, and it won't flower properly, and the flowers will probably die off. So there are certain plants that can't just be grown continuously indoors. They need to receive a cold treatment. I know you could put that cold treatment into a grow room. You could have a cold store when I was doing my PhD, there were cold stores for apples and rhododendrons and things like this so that you could make them flower at certain times of the year. And that's what you do if you're growing for the Chelsea Flower Show, which is the most prestigious horticultural show here in the UK. They force them into the cold, the ornamental plants, and then bring them out early from the cold store to get them to flower at the right time for the Chelsea Flower Show, which may be months away from when that plant would normally flower. So this is not the case with, say, strawberries and tomatoes and cucumbers, or even legal cannabis, where you don't have to worry about a cold treatment because they would never experience that in their natural environment, because either they are tropical perennials or they're annuals. So for perennial crops, either they're woody or not, then you need to consider, do they need a cold treatment? And do you need to protect them from precocious flowering before that cold treatment? So as I say, this would be a big issue for, say, hydroponic strawberry growers who are growing outdoors or in greenhouses, especially in greenhouses, because they're getting a warm autumn, whereas they would normally get a much colder one. So you might need a special variety that's much tolerant to precocious flowering, just like you have lettuce plants that are tolerant to bolting. Any flowering on, say, lettuce or spinach, cabbages, is precocious flowering, and that's deleterious because it ruins the crop. Basil, things like this. You just don't want them flowering any time. It's not a case of early flowering. So it's something to consider. It's something that will become more of an issue as vertical farming and indoor growing away from greenhouses and polytunnels try to get away from leafy greens and microgreens and just vegetative growth, and trying to diversify away from annual crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, legal cannabis, and cut flowers. If you try to grow something more complex that requires a winter period, then this is going to become a real issue. And this is one of the reasons that everyone's looking at hydroponic strawberries at the moment, because it's a big crop, but it's difficult to grow and no one can crack it, or very few people have managed to crack it. There are loads of crops like that, though, that you would need a winter period for flowering, so like raspberries, plums, apples, all sorts of crops that aren't grown commercially, hydroponically, and having a winter period and making sure they flower at the right time and that you can introduce pollinators and fruit set is going to be a massive issue, and it needs to be considered. So if you've looked at this in an indoor growing environment and had issues or found potential solutions, then let me know. I heard a good podcast today and they said that indoor growing indoors in a grow room is you're playing God. And when you're in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, then you're playing with God. And I thought that was a good analogy. So yeah, that's a good one. I'll end on that snippet of wisdom that I've stolen from another podcast. If you found this podcast of use, then please leave an Apple Podcast review. If you're not an Apple Podcast, don't leave a review because it doesn't help us for some reason. Only Apple Podcast reviews work. But please do click the follow button and check out utrema.co.uk. And if you can't spell Utrema, it's Latin for wasabi. You'll find loads of blogs, other podcasts on sports turf, lawn care, arable crops, and you'll find loads of interesting technology. We are experts in getting things into solution that shouldn't really go into solution. And we've got about 8 different products that you won't find anywhere else because it's completely unique technology. And we're developing biodegradable controlled release fertilizers in the next few years, which will hopefully reduce the amount of microplastics get into the environment. And we're a big proponent of stopping carcinogenic fertilizers. So if you've not heard those podcasts, then go and listen to those ones where we expose people trying to sell carcinogenic fertilizers. I'll get off my soapbox and I'm going to go and watch a football match. Hopefully Liverpool can beat Aston Villa in the Premier League. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.